If you're interested in the brain and the body and spirituality and how those might connect in any way, shape, or form, you are going to love this conversation that I just had with Shaleen Kendrick, Dr. Shaleen Kendrick. She joined me on The Sacred Everywhere to talk about neurospirituality and neurotheology and the ways in which our our spirituality and brain are shaped by each other. And we get into a whole lot of fun stuff around kind of like that vagal polyvagal theory and the vagus nerve and regulation of emotion, and talking about the different parts of the nervous system, and what her work is all around this idea of three brains, our three brains of the head brain, the heart brain, and the gut brain, and how all of that contributes to this sense of our spirituality and how we are shaped by that, and how our where we are in that autonomic nervous system experience can shape the stories that we tell ourselves about our world, about our lives, about God. Anyway, it was a great, great conversation. And so let's just dive in. Welcome to The Sacred Everywhere. I'm Dr. Sheri Kling, and in this space we explore how the sacred shows up in real life, in our questions, our struggles, our longing, and our hope. Can we find the sacred in every place and everyone? Let's see. Okay, well, welcome, Shaleen Kendrick, to The Sacred Everywhere. So glad to see you today.
Best friend Sherry, I am so happy to finally make it on this podcast. I feel like I've arrived now
You
that I'm
have
here.
arrived.
I have
Well,
arrived.
it's still new and growing, but so exciting to have you here. Shaleen and I met 2 years ago at the Open and Relational Theology Conference in Wyoming, and we'll both be there again next week, which I'm
hmm
super happy to report. And although, I'm desperate for a break from the brutal Florida summer heat, and I know you're getting the same in Phoenix, and we are
Yes.
going to get that break Monday. I think it's going to be 35 degrees.
What? I'm really glad you
Yeah.
said that. That will change how I pack.
Look at the weather app because there's rain
Yes.
predicted for that day. Now it gets a little bit warmer as the week goes by. So we will,
Okay.
it looks like, get some nice sunny days with a high around 70, which will be a very blessed relief for
You
both of
all,
us.
everyone listening, come with us. Do a last minute registration.
Jump on it. This actually will probably go live after the
Oh,
fact,
dang it. We will have
unfortunately.
severely, sorely missed every one of you.
That's right, Henry. But we
You,
will have had a wonderful time when everyone
you
is there.
exactly. You all have been missed.
Well, so you are working, and you are a fairly recently newly minted
Newly
doc
minted doctor.
doctor of
hmm
philosophy,
hmm
and that was, I know, an exciting time. Although as I can
That is
relate,
one way to describe it.
yeah, it seems like that writing process nearly kills us.
Yes. Yes,
But you made it through. You have finished.
I
And so,
did.
yeah, and so you are working in a really exciting and interesting area called neurospirituality and neurotheology. Now,
hmm
those might not be neuro, obviously, is nervous system. People might not generally have put those together with spirituality and theology, although I think there is more and more work coming
hmm
out in this area. But first, just tell us a little bit about what is this area and what drew you into this work?
Yeah, it is an emerging field. So it hasn't existed for very long. We're looking 15, 20 years, if that. And really, in the last 10 years, since there has been significant changes in medical technology, such as fMRIs, which is a functional MRI, which means
Hmm.
we now have images of how the brain functions while it's actually functioning. So now we can tell when we think certain thoughts or when we participate in certain experiences, we are now able to map which areas of the brain are activated and why, and what does that mean, and what's going on. So obviously, science and theology, you either come from the school of thought, I think that never the two shall meet. They are mortal
Uh-huh.
enemies. You keep science as far away from theology as possible, which happens to be the ideology that I grew up in.
Mm.
We science was the enemy. The that's a very long story that is not for this podcast. And then the other one that I've noticed, theology and science are in conversation, but they're still very siloed. So, for
Hmm.
example, at the AAR, the academic conference coming up, when I attend the cognitive science and theology unit, what's really interesting is they are putting theology and science next to each other, meaning they're talking about what's happening in the brain, but what they're not doing is they're not talking about how spiritual and religious experiences shape the brain.
Mm.
So that is the key difference between neurotheology and neurospirituality. It is not pairing, it's not putting two different fields in conversation with each other. It's
Hmm.
actually fusing them together and noticing how they are mutually influencing one another, which
Yeah.
is a different area of a study. So, as neurotheology and neurospirituality, neurotheology, you're going to find neuroscientist Andrew Newberg started that. He's brilliant, phenomenal. I cannot say enough about his work. And then neurospirituality is Michael Ferguson out of Harvard, Neuro Mike, you would know him. And so they essentially mean the same thing. It is the neuroscience of spirituality, but more specifically, and this is leading up to why I got in this, is neurotheology looks at in real time how do religious and spiritual experiences shape the brain, and
Hmm.
how does the brain shape our spiritual and religious experiences?
Ah, okay. So it's a two-way.
It's a two-way street, always is, always has
Yeah.
been. And so this will then lead me to how and why I got into it. I grew up, as I mentioned earlier, in an ideology that was very Western Christian, the belly of the evangelical church. At the time, we didn't have the language of Christian nationalism, although that was very specifically the sect of Christianity that I was raised in.
Wow.
So I say I was MAGA before MAGA existed, uh, which
Right.
that also is another podcast.
It is.
That's a whole different podcast.
It's a whole other thing.
A whole different conversation. So, for me, growing up in the belly of the evangelical church, for me, it was very, very patriarchal. Racism was infused into the system itself, along with homophobia, all of the things. So,
Mm.
for me, what happened, and that theology, very much the Western type of theology that I came out of is what most people are what we would call deconstructing now.
Right.
So it is, think of Descartes, the mind body split.
Hmm.
Within the theology that I grew up in the worldview, the head was king, and I mean male. Like this was all about. It was like we were head brains on sticks. Minds
Yes.
like never. Don't ever talk about the body. The body is evil. Emotions are
Yeah.
evil. Your skin can't be trusted. All the things.
Right.
So, and it was very, as we talk about, transactional, formulaic, right? If you say this prayer or do these things, hold these doctrines, you will get saved by the God that is up there and you'll go to the place after death, all the things. So, growing up, that was my entire worldview. And I didn't just grow up in that worldview, I very much internalized it.
Mm.
And that is true for all of us, whatever we grow up in. One of my favorite things that I learned in this field is experience is biology, meaning all of your experiences are shaping your neurobiology
Yeah.
in real time. So not only was I shaped by the neurobiology, I very much consciously absorbed it. So I
Mm.
was doing what would be called power by proxy. As a female in that world, I didn't have any power unless I was close to and or helping the other men keep the power structure in place. We see
Right.
this all the time. So I say that because I would hold on to that theology like a lifeline because I
Mm.
felt like it was what was keeping me alive.
Wow.
Cue latter adulthood. I went on Young Life staff at Arizona State University. So I did ministry job right out of college. Then I had two kids with my husband, Sam. And then on our third baby, that's where you can say I'd started asking questions and started to, deconstruct my faith, although I didn't have that language at the time as we started having kids. But really, with our third sweet baby, as soon as she came home, it was pretty clear something is not something's not working correctly. To
Ah.
make a very long story short, we spent what would be then 5 years in and out of children's hospitals. And while I let her story be her story,
Mm-hmm.
my experience of that was I was a young mom. I was still working with Young Life, and I had a beautiful baby in and out of the hospital, and I had a theology that didn't work for me. So
Mm-hmm.
what would happen is all of the things that I taught and preached were no longer holding up during this crucible of medical crises.
Wow.
That it what we would say, in open and relational is if God could, God should. Right. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
as we all know, all the platitudes of this is, she's in pain for a reason, she's suffering for a reason, this is all God's mystery. Go read God Can't with Tom Ord. And all of those questions came up for me.
Yep.
So my theology essentially fell apart. You think of the reason we call it deconstructing is because what's interesting is we now know that our spirituality is an intrinsic part of our neurobiology, which
Mm-hmm.
meaning it is a part of all human beings from the jump. I'll get to that in a minute. But that means that religion is external. It's the thing that we construct that that we scaffold something, we build something that we think is going to help engage our spirituality. And it
Right.
does, sometimes in healthy ways, in
Mm-hmm.
my case, not healthy ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, all that to say, I found myself laying on the floor every day, what we would call corpse pose. And although, because of my upbringing, of course, yoga was of the devil. So I didn't call it corpse pose,
Of
right?
course not.
um, Shavasana would be, the other word. I just was, my millennial friends would say I'd lost the ability to even, and my Gen Z friends would say I was crashing out.
Yeah.
And my
Wow.
boomer friends say, I just need a nap.
Yeah.
And those of us that are Gen X, it was what the F is happening.
Right. Right. Right.
So
I
yeah,
love that translation.
yeah, right.
Those
You're like every
translations.
generation has their own.
Yeah.
And so during that time when she was in and out of the hospital, like I said, it was 5 years. I would lay on the floor, whether it was the shower floor, I would very awkwardly try to get in a corpse pose on the shower floor. It didn't
Yeah.
work that great, but I spent a lot of time trying. Or on
Mm.
the floor by my bed. And here's the really important part, and this is where the neurotheology part comes into play. Because my God stories, my God images were not working for me, the neuroscience would call it a predictive brain, meaning your brain is a predictive brain. And what I had predicted, which was my theology would carry me through the crucible of suffering, when that didn't happen, it opened up what we would call a gap. The predictive gap is what it's called. So, anytime the human brain encounters something new that it hasn't experienced before, or it encounters the opposite or something different than it predicted, you really have two options. Your brain will either retreat or you will become curious, which will release dopamine, which is the reward system, which will give you enough dopamine to explore the gap.
Oh,
Interesting,
that's
right?
really interesting. Yeah.
That's a whole have we could go forever on the pace cycle, friends, but I'll keep
Right.
the story going. So, what happened for me, the predictive gap opened and I retreated. So, rather than necessarily exploring the gap, and I also, I didn't have much energy left. So, I would lay on the floor. And this is why this is important. The God image that I had, which was of a loving father in the sky who needed to sacrifice his son for blood transaction. You all know the story. Because that image of God was not helpful when I was in hospital rooms with a very, very sick baby. When I laid on the floor, I would suspend that image of God. That's a
Mm.
very important part of this story. Because the God story wasn't working,
Yeah.
I would intentionally try to stop thinking. And it wasn't because I was trying to be mindful. I didn't even know what contemplation was. This is about 15, 20 years ago. I
Mm-hmm.
just was trying not to be in pain. And
Right.
I was managing my suffering by trying to escape into, contemplative thinking by just not thinking because all of
Ah,
my thoughts were scary and hard and painful. But
right.
what this did and how it served me, unbeknownst to me, is that when I suspended that, what we would call a very authoritarian God image, I would just picture this loving hand. Like I couldn't get to the point where I didn't believe a higher power existed. So the best I could do was envision these huge hands just holding me while
Mm.
it was like the ground itself was holding me. Um,
Wow.
and it just gave me enough grounding, if you will, to get up, go back to the hospital, keep raising two little kids. So it was in and out. So for 5 years, I would lay on the floor, envision the ground holding me like invisible hands, the way you would hold a broken sparrow. I felt very broken at the time.
Hmm.
So all that to say, 5 years go by, and that was a practice that I held just as a survival tool, if you will. So I did it all the time throughout 5 years.
Mm.
Well,
Can
I
I
get back.
can
Yeah, go ahead.
can I ask you to pause for a second there and say a little bit more about when you were doing that, when you were lying there and imagining that the hands holding you,
Hmm.
was that coming from a place that you were emotionally feeling that, or was it more a place of I'm imagining that because I need to imagine that? Like I because I struggle a lot with those kinds of questions and I want to
Hmm.
feel it. Like I want to feel a presence. And when I
Yeah.
don't feel it, then I feel like I'm being abandoned. And whereas it seemed like you were
Hmm.
able to connect with an image, and I guess I'm trying to just to see if that was is something you were feeling, or were you more like telling yourself this is how it is and I'm going to hold to this because this is what I believe is true, even if I
That
don't feel it.
I love that question. Um, I I honestly felt hollowness. If like I felt nothingness, like, and that is pretty true when people go into trauma, right? Like you just sometimes feel hollowed out or numb.
Mhm.
So what I felt was the ground solid beneath me. And when I was up and in motion, everything felt scary and it was moving too fast and changing too fast. I couldn't control anything. I couldn't fix anything. So what I felt was a body being held on stable ground.
Mm.
And
Mm.
it didn't feel like God necessarily. It just felt like the only sense of grounded, the only sense of solidness I could find throughout the day. Maybe that's the way to say it.
Yeah, so it
Because,
was more of
I
a
was,
physical,
it
like
was a
a real
physical,
physical
yes, that's
grounding.
exactly right. It was not an emotional, I feel like I'm one with the universe. It was I felt like a body laying on the ground. And it was
Mm.
the only place my body would register the feeling of solid and
Yeah.
like a foundation. And that's from that physical feeling of solidness, groundedness. That's where the fantasy part or the mind part started being like, and I would grab a blanket too. And I would grab weights. This is like, I didn't know what I was doing. I now have all the science for what I was doing, but I would actually grab a blanket and I would grab weights and I would put the weight on my chest right here.
Huh. Huh.
And so that's what created that sense of being held, surrounded, 360 by solidness. I had a weight on my
Mm.
chest. I had the ground on my back. I
Right.
could feel the weight of my body on the floor and the weight of the weight pressing into my chest.
Yeah.
And it was that physical sensation that what I didn't realize at the time was regulating my nervous system. I didn't
Mm.
even know I had a nervous system 20 years ago. No one was talking about how to regulate your nervous system on TikTok back then.
If you're enjoying this conversation, I'd invite you to download my free guide, Awakening to the Sacred: 5 Keys to Experiencing the Divine. I hope to, in this guide, help you to unlock a more joyful, creative, and spirit-filled life, especially if you're hungry for a spiritual life that feels real. So check out the show notes and click on the link below to access that free guide. Thanks. Right.
so
Yeah.
so all I knew, like my body was instinctually doing what it needed to do, which that is part of the beauty that got me into neurotheology.
Hmm.
Is the way that we are designed is it's so good. Like I am more in love with my friend Tammy says that which is God. I am more in love with that which is God because I'm more astounded by how we have evolved and how beautiful that is.
Wow.
So what was happening is I was regulating my nervous system below the level of consciousness, which was allowing me to activate my vagus nerve just enough,
Hmm.
that sense of inner vitality and aliveness within, so I could get up and go back to the hospital again. I could get up and make another grilled cheese. I could get up and go back to work.
Right.
Whatever the it was, it gave me enough of that ventral vagal energy and enough regulation to go do the next thing.
Hmm.
But my mind, my storyteller, I couldn't find a coherent story because now I had a regulated body, but a I didn't have a God image that matched that or made sense
Hmm.
with that. If you, so
Yeah.
that's why I was this, there was still quite a bit of discord happening because even though my body was finding self-regulation, my heart brain, which we can talk about later, it was still pretty constricting, like it was still closing in on itself. And the narrative of my mind, I didn't have a story to tell myself that made sense. And
Right.
that's why I love, if you've not heard of Thomas Berry, he has the best. Have you talked to, have you know much of his work?
Right. I read some years back, but I can't say I know it well.
He has this beautiful, let me see if I can I don't have it meant well, I have it paraphrased. But
Yeah.
it's this beautiful, he says, we're in trouble right now because we no longer have a good story. And he says
Mm,
the old story is no longer working. It's no longer functioning. And so
right.
he says we are in between stories. And
Mm,
one of the things he says gave me language. He says the old story, which was the account of how the world came to be and how we fit into it, does not function properly any longer. And we have not yet learned a new story,
right.
the in
Wow.
between. And that was
Yeah.
me. The old
Yeah.
story of how God is, who God is, what God is, and my place in the world was no longer functioning properly
Yep.
during those 5 years. And yet, I hadn't yet learned a new story that would bring coherence and flow and wholeness to my life. So I was in
Hmm.
between stories.
Hmm.
And that was such a, that gave me, I wish I had that quote back then.
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so what happened is, and now I'm going to tell the story, I'm going to go forward. So after those 5 years, as all living systems do, it created a new homeostasis, right? A new normal. And I was like, all right, I'm ready to go back to work. I had taken a leave during that time because of all the hours in the hospital. And I was like, I'm ready to go back to work. But the only job I had ever had was on Young Life staff at that time, which is very deeply evangelical, still very patriarchal, all of the things. And,
Yeah.
but I was like, well, and I now know that our body needs social connection the way we need air and water. It is our most basic fundamental human need. And we don't know who we are unless we're involved with a community. We learn about, and Young Life was my only community. So
Right.
even though my God images had been deconstructed, I had, for lack of better words, divorced the evangelical God, it was still my community. And it was the only job I ever knew. So of course I started applying. I was like, I'm going to go get my old job back. And I pull out, the evangelical statement of faith, and I was going to sign it. And this is how you know it's bad radio, but I had my pen and you have to like fill all the paperwork out. And I
Yeah.
go to sign the statement of faith and I read these statements that up until then, my whole life had been foundational declarations of belief, right? Like
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
evangelical statement of faith is like the American, what, Constitution, right? Where you're
Right.
like, this is what it means to be Christian. And I read the statements and it read like a foreign document to me. Like I would read that we are saved unto the glory of God, and those who are not saved are lost unto eternal damnation. And I would like, wait a minute, that like it did not, it didn't resonate. Like
Right.
the best word I could say is incoherent, meaning coherence means, functional whole, things that function as a whole. And
Right.
statement after statement after statement, what read as a lifeline is now deeply incoherent with the new me or whatever me I am now. So
Right.
instead of going back to Young Life staff, I went on an expedition to figure out what the hell happened to me. Why can't I go backwards? Like, why can't I go back to my old life and my old
Mm.
job? And I thought
Oh.
I was still the same old me, foolishly. I
Oh,
didn't know
wow.
how neuroplasticity works. I didn't know how epigenetics worked. I didn't know microbiome. I just was like, but I'm still Shaleen. Why can't I go do the same thing in the same way? So that
You
pushed me
didn't realize
forward.
that you had completely radically changed as a person. You'd become a
Absolutely.
new being.
Literally a new being. And so now fast forward, I'm now 15 years out of that experience with a strange amount of doctoral work under it and research. And so now I can look back, and of course I don't have my own fMRIs. So for all of you neuroscientists listening, just so you know, I am assuming this is what happened based on my experience and the research that I now have. What I now know and what I learned is that if you think of your brain, your head brain, you have 86 billion neurons up here. And the mind demands a narrative. So your consciousness really only functions in a narrative format.
Right.
It's consciousness literally itself is the awareness of awareness itself. It's first person awareness, which is immediately narrative. So
Right.
the mind demands a narrative. And so what happens is the different narratives that we have or the way that we are thinking is going to light up different parts of the brain. Well, now that we have these fMRIs, we can now better understand that when we envision or worship an authoritarian God, and that means centralized control with the fear of punishment, okay, which is
Mm-hmm.
basically the Western image of God, in case anyone's wondering,
Yeah.
it lights up the it lights up the amygdala, which is that
Uh-huh.
back area of the brain. It's the fear center, and it
Right.
creates us versus them binaries.
Oh, wow.
And literally physically, and this is my favorite neuroscientist, you can go fact check me on this. He literally says authoritarian images and God stories prime the brain for violence. They prime the
Wow.
brain to fight. So what happens is the best way, I'm a very visual person. So in reading all of this research, I started envisioning, because it was helpful to me, like if you think of scales, and so you think of maybe this back scale as the amygdala, that's the fear and threat that, puts us into survival reactions. And then the front, or say the left side is the prefrontal cortex. And we have this place in our prefrontal cortex called the anterior cingulate cortex, the
Mm-hmm.
ACC, and neuroscientists call this the heart of our brain. And it is the area of the brain of social awareness, compassion, and empathy live. So if
Mm.
you picture scales, when we activate through authoritarian God images, the amygdala, and we drop down we put weight in the right side, it actually pulls neural activity away from the heart of our brain, diminishing our capacity for empathy, social awareness, and compassion.
Oh my gosh.
We see this all the time in any fundamental religion. Anytime you have authoritarian God images, you are priming the brain to fight. You are creating us versus them binaries, and you are physiologically diminishing your capacity for empathy,
Wow.
which is why we can't, this is why we operate in dehumanizing, right? It's why we call them unsaved. Right. It's
Ah.
all like it's why we call ourselves warriors for God. It's
Mm-hmm.
why think of all the language that we use. For me, that was my first language was authoritarian Christianity. Um, and I had no idea that I had been priming my brain to fight. I had been further ingraining us versus them binaries with every God story that I was telling
Yeah. Well,
and
now,
diminishing my capacity for compassion.
yeah. Well, so, but how does that line up with, I mean, there is evolutionarily, there is, and I think it is in the amygdala,
Mhm.
that need to be tribal, that
Mhm.
family, that protecting of one's immediate relatives, and there is that tendency to see it
Mhm.
as us versus them. So
Yep.
obviously, authoritarian images of God don't create that us versus them. Do they
It lights them
just?
up.
Okay.
Yep. Yes, you're right. Yes, thank you for that clarification. That is all, it already is wired into our
Mhm.
neural architecture.
Right.
And then what authoritarian God images do is they light up that pathway.
Okay.
And then neurons that fire together wire together. So the more often you are worshiping, envisioning, telling authoritarian God stories, you're actually strengthening the neural network that is exactly that, the us versus them binary. It's
Mm.
why we have so many people today. It's a huge reason why we are so polarized today, because what we are more and more and more lighting up those authoritarian God images as we experience the destabilization within our world.
Mm-hmm.
The authoritarian God images are offering a maladaptive sense of safety, which
Mm-hmm.
is why more and more people are going in that direction, and it's getting more fierce and more polarized
Right.
because that part of the brain is getting traveled more often and it's getting strengthened,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is fascinating. But neuroplasticity cuts both ways. So, neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to shape and reshape itself, to reorganize
Right.
constantly. It's constantly doing this. Now, there's windows, early childhood, adolescence, but we have windows of neuroplasticity all throughout our life. Well, interestingly, contemplation is one of those windows, and I didn't know it. So you can intentionally open a neuroplasticity window with contemplative prayer or mindfulness. And so what I had been accidentally doing is because my God image had changed and became a divine, loving, grounding, mystical being. Like I didn't quite have language then, I just knew it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
that. It wasn't the other thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was really hoping for something that wasn't that. So,
Yeah.
well, interestingly, we now know when we envision a benevolent, mystical, compassionate God image, it tips the scale the other way. It actually loosens the neural activity that is around the amygdala and the us versus them, and it strengthens the ACC, the prefrontal cortex. It strengthens the area of your brain for compassion, social awareness, and empathy.
Wow. So
So,
meditation, mindfulness, contemplation
yes.
all do that.
And what you're imagining while you're doing it really matters. So, if you're
Mm.
doing contemplation and you are worshiping the God of, pick your favorite atonement theory, the God of original sin, all that, you're
Yeah.
not, you are activating the amygdala. But when
Oh.
you're worshiping a benevolent, mystical, um, deeply compassionate, a God that is a God with and for all creation, it goes the
Mm-hmm.
other way.
Wow.
And it decreases the us versus them binary. And it starts to create, it like thickens some areas in your brain up here, which are really
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. And it starts to create a deeper sense of oneness with the world. This is why we have all the desert mystics, right?
Yeah, yeah, right.
And you can see this all the way. This is almost like you can see, take my own tradition, Christianity. You can see the difference between the Crusades and the Desert Fathers and Mothers.
Right.
Now we have the neurobiology of why they're so different. The
Oh, wow.
Crusades kept priming their brain to fight, unsurprisingly. Well, what were the Desert Mystics doing? It's not that, to your point, it's not that those neural pathways disappear. It's
Mm-hmm.
just that they get quieter, is the
Mm-hmm.
way to say it.
Right.
And so
And
you
the
see
others
these.
come on stronger.
Yes. So think of that scale, right? Like it's always getting balanced throughout the day. It's just whichever one you feed is going to go stronger and the other will go quieter.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had been feeding the heart of my brain. So then when I went to go back on staff and I'm reading about the eternal damnation, and all of a sudden I'm like, what? Like that can't pot. Who would say something so horrible? Meanwhile,
Yeah.
5 years ago, I was
Can't
like,
do this anymore.
I was Paul, right? Like our Saul. Like I now understand. Oh my God, I read scripture now through this lens of neurotheology, and I
Mm.
can see how so much of what the historic Jesus was doing is neurobiological integration,
Yeah.
helping people strengthen the heart of their brain that they might quiet those fear centers. For there's neither Jew nor Greek, right? Like you think of all of these different scriptures that pop up that you go,
Mm-hmm.
well, you historic Jesus, you cheeky son of a, you were evolving us in real time. Well,
Yeah.
that sounds
Wow.
like good news. So I turned
Yeah.
into a different human, like truly a new creation, but not just once, again and again
Mhm.
and again and again. And so that's what led me to really understanding where I am now, salvation as wholeness making
Mm.
on
Yes.
cellular to relational to societal to cosmic levels.
Yeah.
It has been
And
so sweet to see salvation as a process, as a neurobiological process within
right.
us and between us. It has been it's a very, I still have a lot of the same words. They just mean things, very, very different things now.
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm so with you there, and we can definitely get more into this in the second part. I just before we go to part two, I just want to ask you, I and you may have been the one that first turned me on to Lisa Miller at
Oh,
Columbia.
yes.
And so, where would you put her work when you were talking about the cognitive scientists and the silos versus the
Mm-hmm.
neurospirituality, neurotheology? Is she kind
Mm-hmm.
of in between? Because she is like measuring the effect
Yes.
of spiritual practice, and not maybe
Yes.
practice so much, but
She's much more in the neurotheology. She doesn't claim
Mhm.
herself as neurotheology, although that really is
Okay.
what she's doing. So she actually, her work is different than Newberg's, and here's why. Newberg and Ferguson, neurotheology, neurospirituality, they are actively tracking what happens to the human brain, the brain in our skull, during spiritual and religious experiences.
Mm-hmm.
What Lisa Miller is doing, and she really is the pioneering voice in this, is has now found using neuroscience that spirituality is a biological component of our actual neural architecture.
Right.
So similar to emotion. So spirituality is not something you go out and get. It is an intrinsic neurobiological capacity that every human being comes into the world with. Now,
Yeah.
so what she does, and it's really interesting, she doesn't apply any of this to religion or doctrine whatsoever. And I was actually having a good conversation with my friend Brian McLaren about this. And I said, Brian, I don't understand if Lisa Miller is basically the neuroscientist that has proved spirituality is a neurobiological capacity. Why does she never talk about the negative effects that some types of religion and spirituality can have on our neurobiology? I'm not
Hmm.
understanding why she just is talking about how it's a spiritual capacity and she talks about all the benefits from it,
Right.
but
Right.
she doesn't ever actually enter into what the fMRI is showing, where it can actually be really hurtful to us as well. And
Wow.
I really appreciated his answer. He goes, you can only fight so many battles. And she has
Yeah.
had a hell of a time helping the
Yeah.
scientific community even begin to see spirituality as a biological capacity. And
Right.
so he was helpful. He goes, that's your work. You're the one who gets like that's go find other people who can, now that we know it's a part of our neurology, now we talk about, well, how is it being shaped? And do we
Yeah.
want that? So she's not asking how is it being shaped? She's asking what is it and how do we engage it?
Wow.
Is
That's
that helpful
beautiful.
in that
Yeah.
way? Was
Yeah.
that clear in that?
Yeah. And I love the way she talks about the innate, like you said, the innate spiritual core and the seat of transcendence, that
Mm-hmm.
we all have this
We all
built-in
have this. Yes.
capacity for self-transcendence and to experience that
Yes.
and the word transcendence can be very baggage heavy in a lot of ways, because people sometimes hear that word and they just think, oh, the God in the sky. That just means the God in the sky, and I don't buy that. But whenever we have an experience that lifts us out of our mundane existence and the problems of our everyday life and kind of lifts us into a higher perspective, that's transcendence.
Yeah.
And that's a very natural, earthbound, embodied thing to experience. It's
Yep.
just a change in perspective. Sometimes we might call it grace if it has that
Mm-hmm.
kind of feeling of it moved us in a way that was healing or hopeful or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
it's, and I love the way that she talks about the seed of transcendence.
I have such a scholarly crush on her. She does.
Can
And
relate to that.
that word trans, it just means to like it means to go beyond, right?
Yes, yeah.
And so like it means really to go beyond it's very similar. It's like to go beyond the current form. Like that's
Hmm.
transformation, and then transcendence is to go beyond even that form, right? And
Right.
you could get into quantum. This is actually why I do love quantum too. Not like I'm a quantum physicist at all. But the very little that I understand is that what has been helpful to me is where classic computers, the light switch is on or it's off, and it's a bunch of zeros and ones, it's a
Hmm.
zero or one in a combination. Well, what I've appreciated about the small understanding of quantum that I have is it's zeros and ones at the same time. And that has
Yeah.
helped me a little bit better understand transcendence, where you go, wait, I am having a mystical experience, some type of experience in my body that is putting me beyond my body and even beyond my consciousness at the same time. So it's both
Hmm.
and you're both embodied, but you're also beyond the body at the same time. And it is fascinating to watch that we are neurobiologically, we have evolved for exactly that.
Right. Oh, that's incredible. Um, so this is so exciting. So I definitely want to pause here for part
Pause.
one.
Part
And then in
one.
part two, pause part one. And then in part two, I would love to go more into what you touched on about Jesus and the stories, the parables, and how he was regulating nervous systems long before we even knew about the vagus nerve and all that.
Right.
So let's plan to get back into that when we come back. Thanks for listening to the first half of this episode. If you'd like to go deeper, Click on the link in the show notes to access the full episode for paid subscribers of The Sacred Everywhere on Substack. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this episode far and wide. I'd love your help to grow this channel. Until next time, may you notice the sacred everywhere.